Yo, what is going on, my fellow weebs? Skrno here, and welcome back to the channel. So I was thinking about doing a react video to another content creator's content that they recently just popped up, and I figured honestly we've been doing a little too much react. Let's go ahead and switch things up a bit. I've been saving this topic for a while, and I think it's finally time to go ahead and talk about this. I think now is a good time to bring up how we can save base PSO2. I know, there are people out there that are probably thinking a few different things. One, really, another person talking about base game and how amazing it is. Relax, I'm pretty level-headed when it comes to base game. I experienced and had a really good time, and we're going to talk about a couple of things that I think are going to be super beneficial for not only base game, but for NGS as well. On the other side of things, I know there are people out there that believe that base game is infallible, and there is nothing wrong with that game ever, and if you believe that there's anything wrong with the game, you're just bad. Also incorrect. Base game was a fantastic time, however, things have changed, and there are some things that base game really needs to make it even seem appealing to go back and really invest time into. And right now, during a time where we just experienced probably one of the bigger content droughts when it came to PSO2, we had a catch-up month of mostly event stuff with less than stellar LTQs. And granted, while those LTQs were worth doing, the process of doing them really just didn't feel very good. And then we've got this entire week of just kind of a lull moment while we're waiting for the next big, chunk of things to do. Stuff like the dual quests and level ups and all kinds of good things that are coming up next week. We've experienced basically almost 5 weeks of nothing really exciting going on in PSO2. And a lot of players really invest a lot of time in Phantasy Star, and they want to be in game as much as possible. Because of that, I think this is a great time to talk about ways that we can basically save base game, because this is a great time for players to jump back and experience that and make their NGS time even better. There are a lot. I'm no stranger to the base game forte or the base game argument that players like to make, and I'm a very big supporter of one of the things that makes base game so good is the fact that it ended. I know some people that really wanted base game to continue and to move on in episode 7 and so on and so forth and continue that story, but the best part of the story of base PSO2 was the way that it ended. They could play super high stakes because it was going to be finishing. And granted, yes, we now know that NGS's story is somewhat tied to base PSO2's. It's not tied in a way that they couldn't do something as insanely, over the top as they did. So it's super cool to see that. But all those things being said, it doesn't mean that base game has no merit and people shouldn't try to enjoy it as well. It is a different combat system. There are different systems in place, and some of them are pretty terrible, to be honest. I'm looking at you affixing and I'm looking at you skill tree. I'm pretty sure the skill tree in base PSO2 isn't what it is in NGS right now, where you can kind of put points in and out. I think it's still the old system, which is pretty bad, all things considered. So that's brought to me a few things I feel like need to realistically be changed in base game that to make people really enjoy it and experience it. So that way during these lull moments and these downtimes, players can jump back into it very easily. It's quite literally attached to NGS. You don't have to have a separate game. If you have it downloaded, you're good to go. You can walk over to a Reaker and jump back into base game whenever you want to. And that is a fantastic feeling to have. Imagine RS3 players if they could just walk over to a teleporter and just jump into OSRS immediately. It was just a world change for them, and their character was mostly intact. How insane would that be? Imagine Final Fantasy 14 players if there were, granted, I know some of these people aren't it's not gonna be the same thing, right? Just stay with me here. But imagine if they could walk over to one of the crystals in town and teleport directly back to Final Fantasy 11, and the character was tied together, and some of their stuff carried over between the two. How insane would that be? We have that in PSO2, and I feel like it's really just kind of being ignored. Players get bored. There's more for them to do, but there's really not much of incentive for them to go do it. And in some cases, it's actually more difficult and irritating to do. I personally was someone who experienced base game for global in all of its wonder. It was a whirlwind of content for a year, and it was amazing for the channel, as well as just having a blast playing the game. We made billions when it came to Meseta, so we were never broke. We had everything we ever wanted, and by the time it was said and done, we had the best gear in the game with the best augments and some of the strongest setups we possibly could have, crushing some of the most difficult content in the game completely, and doing it all as an Etoile. And for those of you guys who don't know, as far as content goes in base PSO2, while Etoile was not a bad class in any way, shape, or form, it was the weakest of all the Scion classes when it came to outright damage, boasting higher defenses because of that, and having to deal with lower amounts of damage. And even then, the weapon that we use as our primary weapon, dual blades or soaring blades, was one of its weakest weapons it had. So not only were we playing the weaker Scion class, we were also playing technically the weakest of their weapons in most cases. But that's all besides the point. Game was a blast, had a really good time. But if I were to go back and try to experience it now, it would be nowhere near what I experienced at that time. So that's going to bring me to my 3 points of things I want to go ahead and change, and we'll bring it to the first one. The mission pass. Right now, if I were to go back and try to create the gear that I made during base game, it would be so incredibly difficult. Without the mission pass to provide us mission badges, we completely can't use the mission badge shop to get a hold of the capsules that you need to make some of the best gear in the game. It is already difficult enough to make Guardian Soul as it is. If you were to think about it, the entire chart boils down to being almost less than 1% completion rate, all in one shot. Granted, of course, you can mess with those with boosts and boost weeks and things like that, and protections, but overall, from start to finish, you have less than a 1% chance shot of that going all the way through from start to finish. And it's insane to even think about. And that was only a part of the process. That wasn't even the portion that included all the capsules that you needed from mission badges. And now players don't have access to those mission badges anymore. Unless you just had them beforehand, you don't have a way of gaining mission badges because there's no mission pass. The mission pass not only provided you a way to get mission badges for making that insanely good gear, you were also able to get a hold of fashion items that were kind of like shoehorned in, that essentially they didn't have time to fit in those events into global, so they were fit into the mission pass. That way players can get a hold of those items. It provides an extra layer of fashion for those players, but I mean, of course, it was base PSO2 fashion, right? So it just gives a bit of collection for people. How great would it be if that mission pass was back again, of course retooled for current stuff, and you could go back and get some old fashion. Now, granted, they of course are releasing new fashion and new versions of it, and they want you to buy the new stuff, but if the old stuff was also available and it was a part of the mission pass, it would give players incentive to do something else that we're going to talk about here in a moment that I think would be beneficial for the game overall. The second thing I want to talk about is more of like just a reason for this and less of like something that needs to be changed. But if you're giving players incentive to go back and play base PSO2, you can also give them incentive to actually pick up premium. One conversation I hear happening a lot in NGS versus the conversation that happened in base PSO2 at the time was there's not really a reason to have premium in NGS. Like, it doesn't really give you that much more. Granted, you are getting access to the shop easier. You do have access to what else was it? You have access to extra bonuses when it comes to auto sell feature, and then just the try boost from premium in general. But outside of those features, and of course getting a hold of the mission pass gold track for free, you're not really getting much else. It's a stark difference from base PSO2, where there were things like the premium drink, there was trading, there was also, I think that was mostly it was the premium drink was the biggest portion of it, but players had the mindset of that, premium is a little too powerful. It's a little bit pay to win, and it's a bit unfair that, because you're paying, a monthly premium, you have access to a bit more power than other players, which was true. Keep in mind that if you have premium in base game and in NGS, if you think about it, they kind of balance each other out, where there's more power in base PSO2, where there's a little bit more quality of life in NGS. The nice part about it is it's not separated. You buy premium once, you have it for both. And as long as you keep your premium, you keep premium in both NGS and in base PSO2. So it's like incentive to go back and play it. Granted, that wasn't really a way you save the game, but it's a reason to save base PSO2 in my opinion. One of the things I would think needs to also change when it comes to this is events in base PSO2. There are so many events, lobbies, quests, urging quests that play during these event times that have already been set up, like that they've already been programmed, already been created. They even came to global. And I don't understand why base PSO2 doesn't see these events. We see, like, you know, of course, the lobby changes. That's cool. But Christmas seasonal event, Halloween seasonal event. I mean, Independence Day apparently came to PSO2 as well. Like, there are so many different events that could be playing, allow players to get a hold of some resources a bit easier because, let's be honest, base PSO2 is finished. It should not be difficult to get fully geared out. They're not adding new gear to the game. They're not adding new armor to the game. And players that are like, oh, it was more difficult before, you're devaluing my gear. If you're really still valuing base PSO2 gear, you really have got to just take a step back, man. It's been so incredibly long. Let people catch up and have a good time. There's no reason why a Guardian capsule shouldn't exist at this point. Like, bring back the mission pass. Make it so players are able to get a hold of mission badges again. Put Guardian Soul in a capsule in the mission pass, or put it in the mission shop and let people grind for it. Give them a reason to come back and do this sort of stuff. And it lets them enjoy that game and enjoy that time during these lull moments. That way there's not so much pressure on NGS all the time to keep the player pretty much just completely on a loop of things to do. Yeah, we can tell people, dude, just turn off the game, go play something else. But it's much easier to tell a player, hey, look, dude, go play this other content. It's also here. You can play it with your same character. Of course, it's a different progression system, and of course, you know, different levels and things like that. But you can go back and enjoy that content, and it's not a pain in the butt to get into. Right now, we take for granted the fact that NGS has like a actual like defined path to progression. Granted, some people may disagree with how it actually is done, but there is a defined path to progression to getting into endgame gear, as opposed to base PSO2 where it just doesn't really exist. You're mostly working with like random rewards from maybe some, you know, from story stuff, and then outside of that, it's just knowledge of what to buy off of the shop, and that's it. And that is really difficult to explain to someone that has no idea how base PSO2 works, because there's plenty of stuff that is complicated in that game, enough to the point where people want to pull their hair out as it is. All these things to say that a few small changes in a base PSO2 would make a world of difference. Now, I'm sure I haven't covered everything they could be doing. There's other things that could definitely be happening, but I feel like those two things are the biggest things they could be doing to make base PSO2 feel much more inviting for players to go back and really enjoy. There are already things that work perfectly fine. Go back and do the story to get tons of SG, go back and experience concerts, or play the casino, or I know, run Cradle to get your badges to get more SG as well. Those things already exist and they're already perfectly fine. I'm talking about the things they could be doing more to make people really enjoy the experience and get into everything else. You've got content like Divide Quests, Hatred TPD, you have content like Solo Sodom, Solo Masquerade, Endless, all of these things. XQ4, like all these things that are fantastic pieces of content for players to go back and experience, and they could enjoy a lot of. But realistically, if you weren't playing at the time this stuff came out, it is a huge pain in the ass to put together gear to do a lot of this stuff. I don't think it should be. I think it realistically should be something that players can get into very easily at this point. It's been long enough. Don't make it hard anymore. Let people enjoy themselves. That's about it. That's all I wanted to talk about today. Again, I didn't catch everything. I'm sure there were some things I missed. There's some changes I'm sure you guys would love to see back in base game, but I wanted to give the ones I feel like are the most reasonable. Things that don't really require a lot of work from the dev team, as I know they want to keep their focus in NGS, and I feel like that's the place you should keep your focus in when you've got a new game. I feel like there should still be some accountability for a base game, because having that pressure relieved from NGS allows them to kind of have that flow between both games. You're not asking people to download anything extra technically. I mean, granted, now it's DLC, but asking people to go into another game or launch another system, it's all built in. Let's take advantage of it. Anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll be reading through them as always. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to keep up with more, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace out.